Welcome to today's session. My name is Billy Cliffin and I'm from Turner & Townsend. We are delivering the Social Housing Retrofit Accelerator programme, and we're delighted to welcome Paul Norman along today for this masterclass. Paul is the Director of Strategic Asset Management from Clarion, which is the largest housing association in England, and Paul will be talking to us today about consortium and contractor collaboration. And Paul brings a wealth of experience from delivering both SHDF Demonstrator and SHDF Wave 1 projects. So lots to draw on today. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Paul.
So as Billy said, we're going to be talking a little bit about how the experience we've had in delivering our SHDF Demonstrator and our Wave 1 through the consortium process. And how through that process we've done an awful lot of collaboration with our contracting partners and so on and so forth. Just briefly, agenda, we'll just do a quick overview of the project that we've been involved in, or the projects we've been involved in so far. A bit of the keys around what we've felt was the key building blocks around building that consortium, the contractor collaboration, and from our experience how we've created the right environment for that to happen. A little bit around the broader collaboration and why do we collaborate, and what have we found the benefits have been from doing that from a Clarion perspective. So briefly on overview. So yeah, we've done, as Billy said, we've done the SHDF Demonstrator and the Wave 1 project. So we did around about 120 properties in the Demonstrator project. Broadly speaking, split across two areas. So we did 50% of that in Fenland and 50% of that in Tonbridge. Our Wave 1 project was not too dissimilar, so slightly larger at 450 properties being delivered this year, and as well as Fenland and Tonbridge, we're also delivering a proportion of those in Merton. And you can see a number of pictures there of various things that we've come across, just a very few of the many things we've come across during the last 18 months to 2 years. But then the final outcome, and this was one of the very first properties completed in SHDF Demonstrator, so a property that was probably started off life at a mid EPCE, and when it was finished was only a couple of points shy of being an A-rated property. And actually many of the properties we did in the Fenland area actually were A-rated when we finished those works. So it's been quite the journey. I think we've all thoroughly enjoyed going through it, but yeah, we've learned an awful lot along the way, and as I said, we'll perhaps talk you through some of the experiences we've had around consortium building and collaborating with our contracting partners. So that's the people that have been involved, and probably there's an awful lot more. The bit that's probably missing off there is the tier 2 providers, where it just becomes too much for a page. But Finland, very important to us. As in Demonstrator and Wave 1, as many of you will be aware, the way that funding worked is you had to be a local authority to do that, and we collaborated closely with Finland District Council in order to facilitate the funding through them, obviously supported by Tonbridge and then more lately Merton. Then our delivery partners in United Living, Equans and Waits, and we'll go into a little bit of detail about how we contract with them and the influence and the part that they've played in taking us through this journey. Some consultants, so Bailey Garner provide us with consultancy support and quota design support, along with 4 Eye Solutions, who are our cost consultants. And then we've got Parity Projects when we're looking at data, help us with the modelling, and obviously we use switchy monitoring devices both pre and post works, and we're now looking at how we expand that beyond the SHDF and retrofit side of things. And then ourselves, the client, and probably more broadly speaking, the staff and the people that work for Clarion and how they've been involved and engaged in delivering the projects that we have so far. So we take a quick look at, from our perspective, and possibly my perspective as well, I suppose, some of the key elements that we've brought into building a consortium. Some of them are quite high level, some have got into a bit more detail. So the first one from our perspective when we looked at this was about having good relationships. Now that sounds, to some extent relatively obvious, but when it came to looking at particularly Demonstrator and the speed that we had to bid, and the very tight bidding window we went through, having really good relationships with a funding partner, which was Finland, was really important. So we have about 4,000 to 5,000 properties in Finland, so it represents about 5% of our stock, and we have a really good relationship with Finland. not just at an asset level, but across all disciplines. We have a healthy development program there. We work quite closely with them on housing management issues and other things. So for us, when we were looking at building that consortium, having good existing relationships was really, really key for us, because it helped us go through. I mean, at the time, we didn't appreciate how iterative and variable process it would be. But having those key relationships has enabled us to actually go through that process in a way that's let us be free to innovate. They've been very supportive of that. And those relationships that we had have been really key to enable us to deliver the kind of projects that we have delivered at the speed we've delivered it and at the scale. Those relationships going further, particularly with those local authorities when it comes to planning and things like that, are hugely key. So where you've got good relationships in those local authorities in that particular part of the planning side of things is unbelievably important, as many of you will appreciate, when it comes to delivering these programs. So for us, when we were looking at consortiums, you know, having a good relationships with all of those involved in the consortium was absolutely fundamental for us at the time. And as I say, the experience we've had over the last 18 months has only gone to reinforce that. It was interesting when building this presentation sort of over the last couple of weeks, is it started to feel a bit like when we were looking at these key themes, it's very similar to building a corporate strategy. And actually one of the things that we made core to building this was having a shared vision. Now that's really, again, important, because it's not about the very detailed things, and you can see the word in there that we kind of agreed from this was more wave one. It gave everyone a purpose and something to hang on to what it is and why we were doing what we were doing. So having that shared vision throughout the consortium, whether it be a local authority or as a client or as a delivery partner or as a tier two, was really, really important to make sure that we were all pushing in the same direction. Because some people just want to deliver numbers. Some people would be looking to, deliver, an EPCA, so EPCB. Having that shared vision of what it is the consortium is there to deliver for has been, again, really, really key for us. And as you'll see throughout this presentation, it starts to build on why having that shared vision is really important when you have to start making quite quick decisions that can lead to some significant financial implications as you're going through. Having that shared vision to pull back on is really key for us in building that consortium. And it was something that we didn't have in probably the demonstrator phase, and something we built on in wave one, and from the learning we've had. But having that shared vision has been really key, and again, from building a consortium perspective, we feel has been added real value to us. Trust. So this goes throughout, and anyone that's delivered this type of work in the last 18 months and those who are about to do it, you have to have trust at every level, because no matter how much planning you do, things will change as you go through the process. So having the ability and having that trust all the way through your consortium, about having trust to make the right decisions, having trust while you set out to deliver this at that level, actually at the end or halfway through it's looking like something else. Having that trust that it wasn't that we were wrong at the start or we set out with the wrong direction. It was that there is a reason for why things change as you go through this process. And actually having that trust through the consortium, which is a lot of that is built through the relationships that you have at the start. But again, having that shared vision and all these things are interlinked. Building trust through the consortium actually enables you to go through the gears and makes decisions quicker in a collaborative way. Finding a good fit. So this is trying to dropping down as possibly a slightly different level. So establishing those top three is quite strategic, but then you get into finding a good fit, and that can mean any type of thing. So partly of that is your approach to how you contract. So our approach at Clarion is very much a partnering approach. So we work very, very collaboratively with our contracting partners, and we'll come on to why that has really paid dividends in delivering this type of work. But obviously building a consortium, if that was our approach and we had somebody else who had a very traditional contracting approach, them and us, that consortium would start to creak, because you've got two different bodies working in different ways. So working ethos and approach to contracting is a really key one. Actually, geographical location, being in the same footprint as somebody else within your consortium is a pretty important piece of work as well. And on the flip side, looking potentially at, the similar archetypes, if you were looking at going into a consortium where you've got a particular type of property that other people are doing, that actually might be a really good fit for you. Interestingly, in our Wave 2 bid, we actually sought or went out and actively sought consortium members that were doing things differently, because we really were interested in learning how other people were deploying different types of products in different archetypes within our own consortium. So actually finding a good fit doesn't always mean the same thing. For us, a good fit was somebody else doing something different that we could have first-hand experience of. Other people might see that good fit as doing something that's very similar to what they're doing, so they get a quicker shared learning. But as I say, thinking about what it is and why you want to do it, and that fit with what your consortium looks like is really key. And then lastly, obvious but often overlooked, is within that consortia having clear roles and responsibilities. So this isn't looking at the PAS 2035 roles, albeit that is important, but this is more around, who is the lead consortia, who is responsible for doing the reporting, who is responsible, whom, because many responsible for reporting the data up through the process, who's responsible for talking to bays, who's responsible for actually facilitating the payments and the money. All of those things actually are quite tricky and quite difficult, and to actually take an awful lot of time and work, and in some respects the work is actually easier to deliver than some of that back office stuff. But identifying the roles within a consortia at an early stage, even if it is at a quite high level, is really, really important, so that everyone understands their role within the consortia, what resources they may or may not need, and again, what kind of what data they may be required to provide, and by when. Again, all sits within that roles and responsibilities piece of building a really good and coherent consortia bid and partnership. So when we look at contractors and how we collaborate, and essentially from our perspective, how we believe we've created the right environment to deliver this. So Clarion 2040 is essentially our asset strategy. It's currently actually being refreshed. An awful lot of the learning from the previous 18 months demonstrator in Wave 1 is feeding into that. But we have an asset strategy that essentially goes out to 2040. So when it was originally born, it was 20 years in the making, or sorry, into the future, which gave us a really long-term vision and visibility of what it was we wanted to do. Now, by having that, what that enabled us to do was go out to the market and put in place 20-year contracts with our contractors. So United Living, Equans and Waits, all at slightly different periods within that. But all of those contracts have been let on the basis of they will be delivering the work, the planned work within Clarion for a 20-year period. Now, that's really important when it comes to collaboration, because nothing says not collaborating like a 2-year contract, because by the time you've got to know each other, you're back out to procurement. So our model was always geared around the long-term investment in our partnerships with our main providers. Another key part to that is when we went out to market is through the procurement phase. Actually, we set it as the 70-30 split in favour of quality. So, and actually the 30% on price, we set the price. So there's very little movement in what the prices are. But the 70% quality was really important because it geared it around, this is the service we want to deliver. This is how we want to treat our customers. This is how we want to work with you in a partnership. So that's how that piece was really, really important. And again, how we built the right environment, it sets the tone from the very start that quality is what's important to us. It's not all about the price, although that is always important. We set a really important governance structure up, which again, we'll come on to in a bit of detail in a couple of slides' time, but that was fundamentally important about how we already set up our planned investment works, and how actually through the collaboration and increased collaboration through SHDF, you'll see how that framework and that governance structure fundamentally changed very quickly in a way that in 30 years I've never seen it. And equally around collaboration is the more visibility you can give a partner, the better. So we operate on the basis of we try and give 5-year strategic programs to all of our providers, giving them visibility of all the work we're doing. We haven't quite got there with the retrofit side of things. So this year was the biggest step we've made. We've been able to give 3 years visibility. So from next year through to the following 3 years of asset level or unit level detail and potential measure detail of the areas we'll be working, the addresses and the probable measures over the next 3 years. And combining all of those things together, and an awful lot of hard work, which again we will come on to in a couple of slides time, that's really created a partnership environment that drives collaboration. Because it's everyone's in it for the long haul, we give that maximum visibility. As a client, we've set the tone around that quality side of things, but we put in place a governance structure that really enabled us to drive that collaboration forwards, and actually really suited and suits this type of work when we talk about SHDF. So talk about the governance structure. So broadly speaking, the bit that's in the box was the governance structure that was in place before SHDF came along. So obviously when we were successful in the demonstrator phase, we kind of expanded that. So you can see that sits there on the right hand side of the screen. The additional bolt-ons, that where we have a project board that looks at these strategically. We have a delivery board that looks at the nuts and bolts and, you know, where are we with numbers, making some key decisions around specification. And then there's some sort of bespoke different specialist groups that sit beneath that. The bit that was really special for me in particularly demonstrator, but it's continued on, is actually that structure turned into this, is that it stopped being a very hierarchical structure, and actually it all started to move around like that. I think was probably what was the most impressive part of all of that was we talked about we've got 3 contracting partners in United Living, in Waits and Equans. They are 3 competitors. It's the first time in 30 years I've ever seen competitors sharing information that was potentially commercially sensitive and would give them an edge in a competitive world with their peer group in a project. It really was something special to see about how everyone from site level all the way up embraced how important this stream of work is to deliver, what it was we're trying to deliver, and how important it was to share. And none of that would have been possible if we hadn't set up those contracts to be in a collaborative way. We would have ended up maintaining a very hierarchical approach. But it is hard work. You know, contracting is hard work at the best of times, but when you do it in a collaborative and partnership way, from a client's perspective and from a contracting partner, it is much more difficult because there's much more grey area. So therefore you do have to work through things much more detailed. That's why that shared vision is so important, because actually you don't have the nuts and bolts in a contract to rely on. This is what we said to do. It's output based. So having that shared vision that everyone buys into, the bit we talked about at the start, actually starts to become more relevant and more important when you operate in a collaborative way. And again, comes back to that trust part about why trust is so important. You have to trust people at all levels throughout this, because once you get on site, as all of you who have done this will know, things change, and actually you can't have it where every decision is being fed up to a board or a high level group. You need people on the ground making those decisions. You need to trust them. Now that framework is built that there's a governance structure that monitors and manages that trust, but you have to trust what people are telling you. You have to trust what the designer tells you. You have to trust what the retrofit coordinator is telling you. That is how it has to work. But actually it is hard work, but it's really motivating. You know, we've been out on site numerous times where actually people have been doing this work for 15, 20 years, are genuinely motivated about doing it in a different way. You know, they're excited about the innovation and looking at things in a bit of a different way, and, you know, how these can work and, you know, different designs. It's really been refreshing. And actually you've seen people pushing each other. You know, we talked about those 3 partnering contractors working in the same environment. They love coming to that meeting and telling each other what they've done better and differently, because they get to show off that skill they've shown. And it's really been great to watch them all push each other harder. And again, in that collaborative space, you really have to be able to challenge each other and actually hold yourself to account. You it is difficult, with it not being nailed down as it cannot be in retrofit world. You will have fallouts, you will have robust discussions, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually really healthy when you're collaborating. You will have differences of opinion, but the real skill and the real art that I think our consortium and the way we've collaborated is that we have the ability to bring it back, to get to a collective decision, to say this is what we're going to do, and then we move forwards on that basis. And I guess for me, this is why it is so critical for me from a contractor's point of view, and why that collaboration is so important. This isn't just another planned investment work stream. I've said it many times, and I'll never get bored of saying it. This is not kitchens and bathrooms. We are not asking a customer to pick tiles and taps. If we are asking our contractors to collaborate with our customers in a different way, as a client, it's incumbent upon us to collaborate with them in a different way. So we have to lead, and we've very much taken that on that journey, the way that everyone has worked for it, and everyone's bought into that process. The flexibility and the problem solving I've touched on a few times. No one property is the same. We learned in Demonstrator when we started off with what we thought were 2 archetypes, we probably ended up with 26. And that all came about having to be flexible on site through the design process, about solving some very tricky and in some respects quite expensive problems, albeit, and we'll pick that up on a few slides later, but the value that has been generated through this process has been pretty significant. The other bit around collaboration is how you collaborate with supply chain. So again, we are very collaborative with our direct contracted supply chain, so the 3 that have been mentioned, but it's actually the supply chain that sits beneath that we've been able to engage with as well. So as part of our process, we have 3 one-day workshop sessions that Bailey Garner facilitate on our behalf, where we have all the client teams in, all the contracting teams in, the designers, the cost consultants, but we also have our tier 2 supply chain come along to those as well, where we talk about the problems that we've come across, we talk about potential innovations, different solutions. In many respects, the last 3 of those have actually helped us shape our new asset strategy going forward. So, our tier 2 supply chain have been a part of what will essentially be our next 20 years program for the biggest housing association in the country. We really have taken that to a new level of engagement. And again, having that collaboration has enabled us to get through some solutions much quicker. And again, we'll come on to some of the value about why that's enabled us to do what we've done in the period we have, and actually move forwards where we believe we can get to from a scale and speed side of things. That involvement in everyone in the design, again, that collaborative approach has enabled everyone to be a part of that, and not just design in the traditional sense of designing the solution on site. It's designing the program, designing the sequence. Everyone that was mentioned on there is part of the bidding process. So when we form our SHDF bids, we involve everyone into that, to tap into their respective expertise, so that the final product that comes out is not only something that's had everyone's individual expertise in, but when it comes to delivering it, everyone understands. So we're not giving it to them on the 1st of April saying, this is what we want you to deliver. We are already out doing retrofit assessments for next year's program. And that started just before Christmas, which is probably a little later than we all really hoped for, but it's probably 6 months ahead of where we've ever been. And that is only possible by putting in place the hard work around collaborating with our supply chain and them collaborating with us. And then there's cost transparency. Now, this has been difficult. Obviously, Demonstrator was Demonstrator. It was a different spec. It was the start. Everything was a bit more expensive because we were all learning about what PAS was. We had some aspirations of what we wanted to do in wave 1, and quite a few things, as probably everyone is aware, have happened around price points, so it's difficult to try and tie that back. But actually operating in this collaborative way has enabled us to actually understand what the cost drivers are, what is pushing things up, where there is potential, margins for improvement. But you don't get that working in traditional contracting ways. It's easy going from a contract client's point of view, the price is the price, but if you put that in place, you don't get any of the added value coming back the other way as well. So again, that collaborative piece that we've put in place and worked really hard at has given us the ability to have good transparency around the costs that we are paying, but equally and goes back to that visibility we give our contractors, the ability for them to be transparent with their supply chain to try and lock in some of the better rates that we can potentially do over the long term, that if we were operating in a non-collaborative way, we simply wouldn't be able to do. The collaborative side of things also, from a culture point of view, it's a culture that shares learning in a very safe space. So as I said, 3 contractors, all of who compete on a regular basis for work, sharing information that would give them a competitive edge, is something I've never seen in 30 years of working in construction. And actually, again, that culture of collaboration and having that consortium built around that culture has meant that the learning and the sharing that's been done has been free flowing. And actually, we've been able to share that back to Bays. We used to share that through the learning communities with the Bays Learning Hub. It's been a really refreshing approach to delivering work, and one that I think that everyone has been a part of it, from our experience, both within our consortium and others, has really appreciated, and I think has really bought into, because we all understand what the end impact of not doing this is from a point of view from our respective customers, but more so from a planet's point of view. And it's really been that culture of sharing learning, because everyone understands how important it's been, I think has been a really important lesson for us all about how collaboration can generate that. So a little bit around, achieving net zero carbon, it is a long-term problem. So you have to have those long-term relationships in place, because actually flitting from contractor here, there and everywhere is quite difficult. So actually that collaboration, that longevity, that visibility recognises the fact that this is a problem for now, but it's a problem that we need to deliver over the short to medium term, over the next 27 years to get through to 2050. And lastly, I've not talked about customer today, because that you could kill hours talking about that, but this is a very different customer journey, so I think I mentioned earlier, we can't expect our contractors and everyone else to collaborate with customers in the way that they need to in this, if we as a client are not prepared to do the same for them. So in order to make that customer journey different, much more transparent, that collaboration has got to happen. We want to get to a place where we're talking to our customers 12 months before the work starts. Now, we can't do that if we're not collaborating with our supply chain in order to let them know where we're talking to our customers. So that's why that whole collaboration piece has to be joined up, because if you want to do that very different piece for customers, you have to take that approach from an end-to-end perspective and looking at collaboration in a very different way. And just very quickly on broader collaboration, there's 2 other bits to sit and look at this. One is the collaboration you have with Bays. So this has been, I've worked on a lot of government work streams. This has been by far and away the most constructive and collaborative one I've ever worked with in any government department. Bays have really, in my humble view, embraced how this needs to work. But when you start forming your consortiums and you start forming looking at the way you collaborate, don't forget how you want to collaborate with Bays, because it's really important that we keep feeding that back to them, because the more feedback we get to them, the way they shape future policy and how we work this through is really important. The second one is group board and execs. Do not forget how important it is to collaborate with your boards and your exec teams around doing this, not so far as in, they have to sign off large amounts of money for you to do the work, but actually we've put in a huge amount of time and effort into working with our group exec team, our housing association board, our group board, around this is why we're doing this. This is why it costs. This is why it takes so long. This is why when we say it looks like this, but it ends up like that. They understand that, not at the detail level, but they have an understanding of when we present programs to them, when we come to them asking for hundreds of millions of pounds to do this stuff, they're actually in a really good place. So when you are talking about collaboration, do try and think about more broadly across your organisation, particularly with those people that are essentially going to be overseeing and signing off that money, because it's hugely important. And actually, when you work through these programs, having them on board in a position where they can make decisions if they need to quite quickly is really advantageous. So that collaboration with them is really key, because it will, in certain circumstances, help you deliver on the ground. So last slide before we open up to questions is why. So what do you get from collaborating? What if it's so difficult and it's so much hard work, why bother? So the ability to scale up and deliver at pace is absolutely one. So as an example, we talked about our demonstrator project was around 120 properties. This year's volume is around 450. So that's like a 300% plus jump. Our program for next year is 1,800 a year for the next 3 years. Again, that's a 300 to 400% jump in the way that we're delivering what is an emerging work stream. You cannot do that without your partners in place. We all recognise that there's skills gaps and the issues around supply chain. So without being collaborative, without bringing your contracting partners, your boards, everyone else onto this journey, you will never ever be able to scale up and deliver at pace. And to give you a flavour of that scale up over the next 3 years, that only gets us to 50% of where we need to be as an annual run rate. So we need to be at around 3,500 properties a year through to 2050. So we've got another big jump to come at some point. So this doesn't really ever stop. I put these two in together, but I'll take one at a time. So innovation, you know, from our learning and the what we've seen in the last 18 months. Innovation is one of those funny things, is where we sometimes do it well, sometimes we don't. I've seen it being done really, really well in the last 18 months through the SHDF programs. You know, the reason I've linked it to value for money is the innovations that have been recognised in the first 18 months through particularly Demonstrator, but more lately at Wave 1, it's taken out £482 million from our long-term financial plan to bring our stock to net zero carbon. That's a huge amount of money to be able to strip out in 18 months. And I do not believe we would be able to have done that had we have not been taking a collaborative approach with our supply chain. And that's where that value for money piece comes. Partnering is often looked at as to being expensive, or you pay through the nose for it. You know, I've worked in both ways, and I've worked as a contractor and I've worked as a client. I disagree. Collaboration gets you value for money if you work at it. If you just sit back and just say we're doing partnering, yeah, maybe not. But actually, if you really push it, if you create the right culture in that partnership and collaborate properly, innovation and value for money will absolutely be driven through collaboration. Transparency. So this isn't about being open book. This is about being open and honest with each other. You know, sometimes you come up against a problem on site, or, you know, we haven't done something as a client or as a contractor. We need to have collaboration. Gives you the ability to be open and honest, saying you are not doing what I need you to do. You know, I often put this as my example of this is you should be able to go into a room, have a really good old row, walk out and go for a cup of coffee and be best friends afterwards. It should be that kind of environment that you have. You should be able to challenge. You know, transparency is about saying, I haven't done this, and then everyone coming together to try and fix it. Again, the experience of the last 18 months to 2 years has shown that collaboration has really driven transparency in a really, really effective and efficient way. The shared learning, which we've kind of touched on, you know, again, I've never seen it done like this, and not just within our collaboration, the collaboration of anyone that's worked on these contracts through BAYS over the last 18 months. The sharing between different organisations has been at a level that I've never seen before. You know, people have come up with problems. A really great example is, and I have lost so many hours of my life talking about meter boxes on the side of walls. I can't even begin to tell you. But actually, it was a scheme. It was a scheme that's been done up in Leeds, where they came up with a really great solution that actually got around this problem, which actually through one of the BAYS learnings then got fed back through to us and actually solved a really big bottleneck problem for us in our program. So, you know, that sharing that's been there, you know, we may have got to that solution eventually, but actually it may have taken 3 to 6 months off that timescale, which for us opened up about 30 properties that we could get on with quite quickly, which 30 doesn't sound like a lot. But when you start scaling that up, 30 120 is 25% of your program. 25% of 1800, that's a real challenge if we can't deliver that. So that's why continuing to collaborate is so important, because it will continually open up the bottlenecks that will keep being there for the foreseeable future as we all work through this, because it is an emerging beast. And lastly, you know, the great customer experience. The way that I think it's the biggest lesson we've learned in the last 18 months is about how we have to engage with customers differently. I talked about, you know, wanting to engage with them 12 months in advance. That's unheard of in any other planned program. You know, 2 to 3 months before we turn up, we start engaging and we talk about the different types, we do the design. We're asking people to live in their homes in a completely different way. If you take Finland, for instance, we've got people in there that have lived in their house since they were 16 years old. They've been in there for 40, 50 years. You know, they've always lived in it the same way. You can't rock up there 2 months before and say, I'm going to cover this in insulation and put an air source heat pump in it. See you later. It doesn't work like that. You know, you have to collaborate with those customers differently. And that's where that collaboration flows throughout our partnership, is that we recognise that every individual within the partnership has a responsibility to treat every customer differently. Our corporate strategy or one of our corporate strands is around having a plan for every home, and a part of that is designed around that customer experience. The learning we've taken from this is about how every home is different, how every customer is different. We shouldn't just segment them based on age or where they live or, you know, or their background. There's much more to it than this, where the asset and the person actually really come together, where you do have to consider both in tandem. And that collaborative way of working for us has really worked. And just before I go on, there's one, I mean, we have so many feedback from customers, but one of my favourite ones, I think it was in Finland, it could have been Tonbridge, I can never remember, is a lady. We were doing a tour with some counsellors, and a lady came out of a house, which always breeds fear into you when you're doing a tour like that, because you think, here we go. And she was glowing about how she was on a prepaid meter and she used to pay £30 a week. And her bill had dropped down to £8 a week after we'd done the work. You know, that's like £1,100-1,200 a year. That's pretty life-changing. And it's little things like that that you sit there and you go, I'm not too sure we could have delivered that in the traditional way. She might have got a saving, but would she got that saving? Would she be chasing me down the street to say something positive? I'm not too sure. And it's moments like that that actually really force to me, and I think for our entire partnership, that the collaborative approach that we take has really enabled us to deliver what we've delivered in the last 18 months and what we aspire to deliver going forwards. And with that, thank you very much.